All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our September general meeting, Journal Club. So today we have a special guest joining us. Miranda, I'll let you do the introductions.
So we have Dr. Schroeder with us. He's a foot and ankle surgeon down at Mercy in Toledo, Ohio. And then if you want to introduce the rest of yourself, Quinn, because you know your future roles better than I do.
I don't know how special of a guest I am, but Miranda, thanks for the invite. Uh, just kind of be observing more today. Um, I am a third-year resident out of Toledo, Ohio, podiatric medicine. I'm sure you probably haven't had a podiatric resident host before. A lot of people ask what was my schooling, what did I do? Undergrad, 4 years at med school out in Arizona. Did a lot of those classes with DOs. So while it's separate, it's also combined with them. And then 3 years of residency, and then sometimes a fourth year of fellowship. Kind of my goals in the future, a lot of lower extremity reconstruction, plastic surgery techniques, and then really would love to get into engineering, consulting, and even mission trips one day. As far as what I do, it's a pretty wide scope. I can do anything from ingrown toenail removals to free vascularized fibular bone grafts. Did one of those last week. So it's a pretty wide scope there. But yeah, if anybody would like to discuss anything, you're more than welcome to get my number from Miranda. You can reach out, always welcome visitors. Miranda's come down several times. But just here today to listen. If anybody has specific questions, you're welcome to throw them my way. I have never personally seen a giant cell tumor. Read about them a lot and seen other types of tumors, benign and malignant, but happy to share any information today. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. We'll definitely be getting your number from Miranda because I also am very interested in mission trips in my future. All right. Now for the presentation by Jordan, I'll let you take over. Go ahead, Jordan.
All right, so I'm Jordan. I'm a fourth year from Ross University. So I actually majored in chemical and biological engineering with a concentration in orthopedics as part of my undergrad. So I was focusing on prosthetics and biomechanics, which was an interesting aspect of the degree. So this was something that came up in the ED on my orthopedic rotation, which was a giant cell tumor that was found in the distal phalanx, but the lady came in for an injured finger. Yep. So this is the literature report that we used to kind of put it together. So she's actually still undergoing treatment and releasing the documents from Montefiore. So I would actually like to extend on this in the spring when I have access to all of it. But this is the basis of a very similar report that we experienced. So giant cell tumors, and especially giant cell tumors in anything other than a long bone, are pretty rare. So this patient presented to the ED. She was cutting, I believe, a watermelon over the summer. So we went in for x-rays just to check if there was any deep involvement or anything else going on. She complained of numbness and a little bit of tingling that was in the left forefinger that was on and off for a couple years. And it sometimes would extend from the distal to the proximal phalanx. But there was no bruising. There was no obvious deformity other than the cut that was going to be, we'll see on the next slide. So it was pretty superficial. We were just going to stitch her up and send her home. She had no fever. She had no chills. A little bit of an ache if she overused her hand. Past medical history was not significant. Just an appendectomy. Pain medications like NSAIDs did improve it from time to time, but like I said, no other findings. I also don't care if this is interactive. I'm totally cool with people like butting in or asking questions. That's fine too. My attending is currently at the hand conference that was supposed to be here today, so thank you for stepping in. But no bruising, no lacer, like nothing that was significant, and there was no neurovascular compromise. Next, so one of the key things we did was for these tumors. So when it came up, we noticed the lesion, so we decided we would go for an X-ray and an MRI to confirm what we were thinking. When doing any kind of bone tumor, you don't just kind of go for a biopsy because they seed pretty easily from what I understand, and you don't want to violate the planes. So one of the things we were going to look at with her is surgical intervention, bone grafting, what the next steps would be. Next slide. So this is about the same picture that she had. So it was a well-defined osteolytic lesion. We had a confirmation for the lesion that included soft tissue swelling, which is what actually concerned for the giant cell. So she had swelling right about here. Again, she kind of thought more it was along the lines of the superficial cut that was maybe part of it. We sent it off when it went down to the city for pathology, where they did confirm it was giant cell tumors on the pathology slide. And it's actually one from a recent pathology elective I did. One of the big things about them is when you have these planes, they easily will spread like up further in the finger. So what Montefiore did was actually take a isolated aspiration for it, and then they isolated the finger, and it will be amputated in the coming weeks, which is the unfortunate part. One of the big things of diagnosing bone tumors is there's a lot of different kinds. So because this was in the finger, we kind of assumed it wasn't anything to do with giant cells. We were thinking more of maybe an osteoid osteoma or a brown tumor. She did have a little bit of a family history of parathyroid cancer, so we were kind of wondering if there was something going on with that. So we looked at the giant cell tumors, which are generally benign in our long bones, the endochondromas, which is the cartilage, which we could have considered because it's in the hands and feet. Osteosarcomas, not typically something you're going to see in the 30-year-olds. And then the brown tumor, which was another one we had our higher up on the differential. It's a great mimicker of giant cell tumors. So then these are just kind of the main features when we were talking about the different types of tumors. It came up in our tumor board conversations too. So we had different types, different features where you're going to find them. So osteosarcomas are mostly the most common primary malignancies, and they're found mostly in the femurs. And you'll find like osteoid production versus like our endochondroma, which is going to be like our cartilage production in the chondrocytes in the hands and feet. And Ewing's you also find with the small neuroendocrine cells in the diaphysis of long bones. Yeah. So the big management for this was the primary treatment, which we're going to be doing. She did a cryotherapy to reduce the risk. And once they do the amputation, they're going to do a bone graft at the end to kind of smooth up the resection. Sometimes they do consider doing a wide scale resection, so going further down the hand, going into the carpal area. Hers was pretty isolated, so they did a whole body bone density scan. And from there, they determined there was no additional lesions. It was an incidental lesion. I don't know if they're going to include the denosumab in the rankle therapy, which is used to treat the shrinking. That will be something they talk about in the future. And she will be monitored for the next 5 years pretty closely. So on to the discussion part. For the article itself, they emphasize that giant cells are where they're usually found, and it's rare. Typically not something you see in a lifetime. Maybe one case most of the orthopedists I've worked with have seen, let alone where it was. The post-op surveillance, but the study itself that this paper did is limited because there isn't a lot to focus on. So it's kind of a newer thing. And if she hadn't had the cut on her hand, would she have even come in? And the paper kind of talks about a similar case with that. So let's open it for discussions.
I had a quick question about this. So you mentioned doing an amputation followed by a bone grafting. I'm a little confused as to how that would work. If you're like removing the finger completely, like where would you be putting the
So
cement,
what
I guess?
they're going to cement, I guess, at the end of the DIP joint to do some kind of functional residual thing. I'm not entirely sure what they're doing. This is the current plan. I'm not sure if they're going to go in for the amputation, resect the tumor, and then bone graft, which is another thing they did talk about doing, or if they're going to take the entire finger.
Oh, I see. So it's like either or. So you like
Yeah, it
either
needs to be
amputate
more.
it or you bone graft.
Yeah, you can amputate it, you can bone graft it. One of the things they talked about too is a possible prosthesis, if they were considering doing the hand, if there was any signs of METs. There's been 2 cases that I've read about that have had this, neither have had METs or any additional lesions. They're pretty isolated, which is good.
Okay. And I guess maybe a follow-up question for Dr. Schroeder. You know, I don't know if this has ever been done before, if it's like something that just doesn't make sense to do. But how come like if someone were to like have just one of the three phalangeal bones removed from the finger, like why wouldn't we be able to just like replace that with like, you know, a titanium rod, like how we would with like a femur or something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there is some studies out there. If you've read up on osseointegration at all, which is, you know, they're doing it for the femur, the tibia, doing it for some of the long bones in the upper arm as well. Um, but what I also know is there are some case studies out there. They've done it in the phalanges before too. So, you know, they're osseointegrated titanium implants that if I saw a picture earlier, I was kind of wondering about your first question as well. I would think they would just disarticulate this here. I'm not quite sure what they're going to bone graft. Um, but I would assume they're going to take the entire finger at this point and maybe the metacarpal head. I don't know if you touched on that a little more, but so to your question is if can you replace the joints with some sort of internal prosthetic? Probably so. I think it's gonna be tough on this case because if they disarticulate this at the MCP, um, you know, could you do a osseointegrated implant or something like that in metacarpal? Possibly. I don't have that answer.
So
Thank you.
that was actually a discussion they had, I think about 2 weeks ago, was do we disarticulate the whole thing? I think they're more concerned if the margins aren't clear, and it's hard to obviously biopsy and determine if the margins are fully clear without violating the different planes. Um, and I think they also discussed having like, so her finger would be shorter if you did put back together versus if you left it alone. So I believe they are just going to do the whole finger at this point. It makes more sense. Um,
I
but
would
that
hope
is,
that they talk about doing like a fresh frozen specimen intraoperatively because a lot of times with these two, you know, if you're gonna then go take, you know, further bone or second further bone, you can send those down to the lab and keep taking you know, basically more slivers of specimen until you get clean margins. So that's always a possible option too with this.
that is what they're, so I think that is part of it, is they're gonna do fresh frozen samples, see where it goes, then from there, they're gonna amputate completely versus doing a graft. It's pretty, from what I understand, I think they have it at what they think is like a stage 3, and I'm not totally sure why they staged it that way. But that's something they were discussing up until last week.
What do you guys mean when you say fresh frozen samples?
So, fresh frozen is when they are in the OR and they're going to take down a sample. So, for example, if they're taking for the amputation versus if we're going to do bone cement, what they'll do is they'll have a pathologist come up and stand by. They'll take a sample, very, very small, and they send it down to the pathologist. They do a stain. It takes about 30 minutes to do from start to finish, depending on how big or small the sample is. And then they look at the margins of it. So they'll label it if it's proximal or distal, stain it, they color it for each side, and they see if the margins are clean. So if they don't see any giant cells in that margin, that would be something that would indicate it's clean, versus if you see a whole bunch, you obviously know where, but if it's clean on the proximal end versus the distal end, you could say, okay, well, we need to take more proximally, and they keep sending slivers in very, very small increments to see if they can get away with keeping versus amputating.
Oh, okay, okay, it makes sense. Does anyone else have any other questions or concerns? Or want clarification about something?
So you said that they're still debating if they're going to use the denosumab therapy. Do you know why? What would be like an indication to not use it?
So an indication to not use it if you can get the clean margins and completely resect. You're not going to use it if you can resect. If you can get it completely clean. So if that's the case, they probably won't use it. And there's no, like I said, there's no Mets that we know of. She had a full body CT and PET scan. So that was something they're considering. From what I understand, it's kind of like an all or nothing on the bone tumor. I think they might do a little radiation to the area again if they leave, but if margins are clean and they do a graft, it's a little different.
I think one of the big things to focus on here is you're always looking at, you know, risk versus benefit and functional recovery. And the fact that this is not the thumb or the index finger, is I think big news for the patient. And, at the end of the day, it has not metastasized is awesome. And this patient can, cosmetically, it's not great. And there are options out there for replacement of that finger. But, I think the situation could be much worse. So hopefully the patient does well with it in time.
Yeah.
All right, guys, if we don't have any other questions, does anyone have any questions for Dr. Schroeder about anything specific, general?
Went for the quicker, shorter presentation because I know it's match week, or not match week. It's ERAS week, including myself. It's kind of a very stressful week. Quick, short, but people would want the time back to kind of work on applications. I know I did.
Yeah, we definitely feel that too. Well, if that's the case, then we'll move on to sort of our housekeeping things. And Dr. Schroeder, thank you so much for coming. As you mentioned before, if you guys wanted to get in touch with him, to reach out to Miranda for his contact. But thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely, guys. Yeah, feel free to reach out. If you want to discuss anything, come by, whatever. Happy to help.
Awesome. Have a great
Good luck
rest of your-
good luck on everybody's application week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.